Welcome back, everyone. If you're just now joining us, I'm David.
And I'm Edison. We're excited to tackle the next topic in our series, Your Money and the Election. Stop fear and take control.
And today, we're digging into a hot topic that investors are buzzing about as we near the 2020 presidential election. Will our country's relationship with China and the current China-United States trade deal impact the market?
Good question. So it's not exactly a secret that relations with China have had their ups and downs this year. As is actually the case with most presidential elections, trade is a top priority for both candidates on both aisles.
Often, voters find themselves worried about how an election will impact trade relations. And as a result, how does it impact their finances?
One way you can reduce your fear of the unknown here is to simply address the one thing you can control. That's your knowledge of the current trade relations with China. And what does each presidential candidate believe in as the best course of action? Now, becoming acquainted with the facts can help to put your mind at ease when you find yourself worrying about any sort of uncontrollable potential situation.
Uncontrollable, the market and political situations, right, Edison? So let's start by reviewing where the United States is currently in our trade relationships with China. So for decades past, China and the United States have had a generally close-knit trade relationship. Both countries are known as trade giants all around the world. However, our current administration has gone against the grain and started to impose more restrictions on Chinese trade.
That's right. So, for example, there are now tariffs on nearly 2/3 of Chinese imports into the United States. The current leadership cites that China has become a disruptive competitor who often acts unfairly and should be treated accordingly.
And what have the results of these new policies been, Edison?
Well, glad you asked. So, the original trade deal with China was meant to help lift the tariffs and ease the burden placed on the Chinese economy. Now, under phase one of the deal, Beijing is and was expected to increase its purchasing of U.S. exports by at least $200 billion by the end of next year. However, it's becoming apparent that this year the Chinese economy has been hit notably hard by the coronavirus, and it's likely these demands will not be met in their original decided upon timeline, David.
Right. So if they're not met, let's go into what's the goals outlined in the trade deal if things are not met.
Right. So when we look at that, so the current plan is to reinstate tariffs if China cannot hold up their end of the trade deal. Simple as that.
Okay, so this is interesting. So American investors seem to be concerned on both sides of the aisle about what will happen with Chinese trade relations, regardless of who is elected. So what few people realize is that both President Trump and presidential candidate Joe Biden actually have similar stances on trade with China. So that's the one part that a lot of people don't.
Can you expand on that real quick, David?
Yeah, for sure. So here's the thing: the general view of both Republicans and Democrats, it's actually been that China is using predatory trade tactics that harm American workers and the economy. So Richard Haas, president on the Council of Foreign Relations, he has said that no matter who is elected, it's likely that Chinese-American trade relations will continue to be tense over the next 5 years.
So what we want our viewers to take away from this information is quite simple. Now, trade relations with China may continue to shift after the election, but that change is not dependent on who gets elected. It is not dependent on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's essential to keep in mind that the market has endured countless changes to international trade relations over the last 100 years. This is nothing new.
This is right. So if you're feeling worried at all about how Chinese trade relations will impact your portfolio, we advise patience. It's important to be watchful, but also realize that in this specific case, the United States stance on trade with China will likely remain consistent with what we've seen this past year because it doesn't matter who sits in office.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for our final episode where we will be tackling inflation.
Looking forward to that. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.